Biologists go out to study zebras, and they're like making notes on a zebra, and they watch it, and then they look down at their notes, and then they look up, and they think, oh, I don't know which zebra I was looking at. So the camouflage is actually against the herd, because a zebra is a herd animal, not an individual. So this was a quandary for the biologists, so they did one of two things. One was use a dab of red paint and dab the haunch of the zebra, or tag it with an ear tag like you use for cattle. The lions would kill it. So as soon as it became identifiable, the predators could organize their hunt around that identifiable animal. That's why, there's the old idea that lions and predators take down the weak animals, but they don't. They take down the identifiable animals. So that's the thing, is if you stick your head up, you get picked off by the predators. And so people are often very afraid of looking at monstrous things. And then the question is, well, should you turn into a monster? And the answer to that is yes, you should. But you should do it voluntarily and not accidentally. And you should do it with the good in mind rather than falling prey to it by possession, essentially, because that's the alternative. How does it possess you? That's easy. Your suffering makes you bitter. Your bitterness makes you resentful. Your resentment makes you vengeful. And once you're on that road, you go down that a little bit farther, man. There are floods coming. You can bloody well be sure of that. That's absolutely 100% certain. Some of them are going to be personal. Some of them are going to be familial. Some of them are going to be social and political and economic. Are they going to be catastrophes for you? Or are you going to ride them out? Are you going to prepare? Well, the first issue might be, well, do you have your act together well enough to see them coming with enough advance warning so that you can take proper measures? Maybe just to sidestep it. Maybe just don't go where the flood is going to be. That's a simple thing. But maybe you don't have that luxury, right? Maybe someone in your family is going to get really, really sick. Maybe there's just a tiny pathway through that everything doesn't fall apart. It doesn't end in divorce. It doesn't end in death. It doesn't end in sorrow. It doesn't end in catastrophe. But the margin of error is like slimmed down to virtually zero. And every imperfection that you bring to that situation is going to increase the probability that that tragedy is going to turn into something indistinguishable from hell. And that's coming. Maybe the best thing to do is to put yourself together so that when it comes, it can be the least amount of awful possible. Happiness as an aim is shallow and weak. It cannot withstand suffering. Obviously, because when you're suffering, you're not happy. And if the purpose of life is to be happy, then when you're suffering, your life has no meaning. And then if you're suffering and there's no meaning in the suffering, then you're really suffering. First of all, don't aim at being happy, because that's just not going to work, especially when the storms come and barbarians are beating at the gate. You can just forget about that. And there's going to be times in your life where you're suffering so much you can't believe it. And so you're going to need something a lot more robust than happiness to get you through that. And then you might say, well, what's more robust than happiness? Or maybe even what's more robust than pain? How about adventure? How about we go out and sail the uncharted seas, You're aiming up. There's something that you could change, that you would change. That might be a very small thing. Could, well, that's within the grasp of your power. Would is within the grasp of your will. To combine those two things might be a very small shift. You might only be willing to make a very tiny step forward. It's like, fine, good enough. Make a tiny step forward. And that makes you a slight bit stronger than you were before. And then the next step can be slightly larger. And it's the path of humility. Start ridiculously, pathetically. Study for 5 minutes a day for a week, and then move it to 10. You'll be able to do that. And don't cheat, because one of the things people do is they make a deal with themselves like that. I'm going to study for 10 minutes a day, each day. And then they get into it and they think, wow, this is going really good. So they study for 2 hours, and then they've broken the contract with themselves and they don't trust themselves anymore. And then they don't study for a whole year, or, well, maybe for a month. So, but set your contract. Ask yourself, what could I do to move myself forward to my goal that I would do? And then how could I improve that incrementally? So that's the right way of going about that. You hear now and then undergraduates, they say, well, I just write what the professor wants to hear, and then I get a good grade. First of all, most professors aren't that corrupt. You have to be pretty corrupt before you go that far, before a student will hand you something that's well crafted and well thought through, and you'll actually punish them for it. You've gone way off the malevolent end of the academic spectrum when you do that. Now, maybe you're a bit biased and you'll give them a B+ instead of an A, and it's not like that's particularly forgivable, but it's not a catastrophe. So I think it's a bit cynical on the part of the undergraduates, usually. But more importantly, It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to do your whole 4-year degree and all you're going to do is write what you think your professors want to hear and you think you're going to come out educated? It's like, no, you're not, because you've rewritten a different self and you've practiced deceit with regards to your highest moral faculty, right? Your capacity for articulated speech. You've practiced that for 4 years.
Jordan Peterson, you've said that men need to, quote, grow the hell up.
Well, because there's nothing uglier than an old infant. There's nothing good about it. People who don't grow up don't find the sort of meaning in their life that sustains them through difficult times, and they are certain to encounter difficult times. And they're left bitter and resentful and without purpose and adrift and hostile and resentful and vengeful and arrogant and deceitful and of no use to themselves and of no use to anyone else and no partner for a woman, and there's nothing in it that's good.
You know, I calculated, I don't know, when my parents were in their 70s, I usually saw them about once every 2 years. We communicate a lot more than that, but we live a long ways apart. So I calculated, well, my dad's probably going to live till his mid-80s or late, somewhere in there. He's 70, let's say. I'm going to see him 40 more times. Okay, 40 more times. That's urgent. So you better get it right, because you don't have that many opportunities. It's the same when you're formulating relationships in your adolescence, late adolescence, and early adulthood. You don't have that many experiments to run, and you get old a lot faster than you think. Attention. Attention is an underrated faculty. It's not the same as thinking. It's watching, to see what's there in front of your eyes, and to guide yourself as a consequence of what you perceive.
The thing that tends to turn people against life is the fact that life is full of inexplicable tragedy. I would say that if you can develop a motive, an attitude towards the world that's characterized by an increase in the ability to bear its tragic circumstances, that's evidence that your attitude is correct. Now, the only person who's going to be able to determine that is you, because it's not going to be evident necessarily to people around you, and it may not play out the way you would want it to in the external world. How is it that you can come to the state where you can trust your own judgment about your beliefs? Well, that ties back into this. If you fill up your head with information that you know, by your own definitions of truth, to be false, then you can ensure that you're not going to be able to trust your own judgment. Now, the problem is there's going to be times in your life where your judgment is the only judgment that can even possibly be valid. And it better be the case that when you're in that circumstance, that your head is free enough of lies so that you can be certain that the decision you're making is right.